Welcome back to Roadmap, the Auto Trader podcast for all things product and tech. I nearly forgot what I was doing then. This episode I've got three great guests, this time talking about data. So, hey Catherine.
Hello.
Hello Michael.
Hi.
And hi Steve.
Hi Pete.
Cool. Right, so just to kick off, could you give us a quick intro into your sort of job title area you work in from a data perspective? Steve?
Well, I'll go first. Yeah, so I'm Steve. Been here 3.5 years now. I'm a digital analyst. I work in the user analytics team, cross-functional team and platform engineering, focused on the consumer. So anything about the consumer, building products based on consumer data. That's what I'm involved in.
Cool.
Yeah.
What about yourself, Michael?
Yeah, I'm a data analyst. I'm in the search products team, focusing on all of our sort of prominence products, and also been working on leasing recently as well.
Nice. And last but not least, Catherine?
Hi, I'm Catherine. So I'm also a data analyst. I've been at Auto Trader for just under 5 years now. So I've worked in several different areas. Where I am at the moment is I'm in support and messaging. So we've been quite focused on digital retailing and supporting our operational teams with the data that they need around when consumers sort of need a bit of help on the digital retailing journey.
Cool. So, first question I've got is three analysts, but Steve, you're digital and you two are data. Is there a difference, or is that just an anomaly with titles?
So there's three disciplines within the analytics community. We've got data scientist,
Yep.
data analyst, and digital analyst.
Right.
So there's commonalities between them. Ultimately, we've all got the same goal. We want to create good products for our retailers and our consumers. I suppose from a digital viewpoint, we're really focused on the consumer. So we like consumer experience, consumer behavior, journeys. Anything that impacts our core metrics that we talk to our retailers about, that's what we really like to get involved with.
Right.
I think possibly when it hands over to more complex questions about the retailer, that's where we bring in the big guns. So there is a bit of a difference, but we're part of a wider analytics community of those three disciplines, and we share knowledge. We catch up regularly to kind of share methodologies and approaches to problems.
Right.
So we work really, really closely together.
Okay. So did you come in as a digital analyst?
I came in as a digital analyst. My background is working in digital marketing roles, PPC, SEO.
Oh,
I've
right.
kind of done them all,
Yeah.
but always with a very heavy emphasis on data and performance. And that's typically the route that digital analysts come in by.
Yeah.
Whereas data analysts and data scientists probably more linear pathways in terms of statistical heavy, more methodical about how they approach problems.
Yeah. So what about you two then as data analysts? What was your route into Auto Trader as data analysts?
Do you want to go first or should I? I can go.
Yeah, go on.
So before I worked here, I worked as an insights analyst at a digital marketing agency. So it was a lot less technical a role, mainly based in sort of spreadsheets and sort of pulling data out of Google Analytics. But before that, I had done an astrophysics degree. So obviously that was, a little bit more technical. So I wanted to kind of balance out the two. Plus also I love cars. So that's how I ended up here.
Interesting. What about yourself, Michael?
Well, before this, I did a maths and stats degree, and then my first job was in a big marketing company, and the whole idea was to make a model that would show you how your adverts were doing, like TV adverts. How much did this TV make this company? Did that for a while, and then did the same thing over and over enough that I was like, I want to do something new. Came to Auto Trader, and then done all this new stuff. And there's loads of machine learning models we can look at, loads of data engineering problems we've got. I think the role itself is quite broad.
Yeah.
Like we've all got different kind of ways of doing things and different strengths that we look at.
Yeah.
Engineering, machine learning, the actual sort of reporting side, like what do we show people in our BI tools?
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, because when I joined, I was trying to think back because I've been here for like 11 years, and the data peeps I used to work with probably more in your sort of space, Steve. So when did I don't know if you know, but when did the sort of the whole data as a discipline thing really start to come alive? Because data scientists, I remember suddenly they were a thing and there were people at Auto Trader, but I'd never heard them before. So do you know what the history of that is in terms of growing the data discipline?
I think I'm the one that's been here the longest, and I
Right.
think it had started just before I started, really. I think previously lots of analytical people, my understanding, this might be wrong, but my understanding was they kind of worked in various different areas of the business, but they were kind of more of they'd come back to sort of a hub where they'd sort of do their
Yeah.
data, whereas the move towards more data science driven and data analytics, that there was a community then built, the analytics group, which Steve's obviously just sort of described, but there was more of a drive to get kind of embedded into different areas of the business and to really understand and be that technical expert in each of those areas. So that movement had started before I started, really, and has just sort of grown ever since.
Yeah. And how big is the data community now? Roughly.
There's probably 25 to 30 of us now.
Yeah, I
and
think
Wow.
it's nearer 30.
near 30,
Yeah.
yeah. It's
Yeah.
It's growing quick.
Yeah. And how many scientists are in that mix?
7 or 8, maybe.
Yeah.
And then there's 6 digital analysts. Apologies if I've forgotten anybody there. And then the rest are data analysts.
Yeah.
I think back to your previous point about when does this start from a digital perspective as well. I think the last 5 years we've seen a movement away from Google Analytics as a self-serve tool, as all you need as a business, to businesses with the capacity of building pipelines with Snowplow, etc. And then there's a requirement for the digital analysts to get more technical and more embedded in the data. So it's all going that one route where you've got more control of your data, and data science can apply their logic to these problems at scale now.
Right.
So,
And if you, I mean, like, again, I think I'm mathsy. I'm not. I used to be, maybe a long, long time ago. But just to sort of, I really understand. So, working in data, what like the key deliverables that, as data people, data analysts, digital analysts, what are the key deliverables that like you're measured on, or what success looks like? You know, not asking for data points, but like, what does good look like in terms of your roles?
I think it's a $1 million question, isn't it? So the job, as I see our role, is kind of resolving ambiguity with product sometimes. So it's helping stakeholders and product to understand what's achievable with this product, what data points do we have initially, and actually working with them to establish OKRs, the KPIs. I think that's one of the biggest jobs as an analyst. It's all well and good doing the analysis, but unless you've set up front OKRs and KPIs and you've got something to work towards, that's kind of secondary.
Yeah.
So that's, I think, getting us in early and getting data in the conversation from the offset is probably the biggest takeaway, I think, that I could give anybody when working with data.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What about yourself, Michael?
I think I can't think of another role that's exposed to every stage of the data in itself. Like, there's the source data where you've collected some events, then we would look at helping to model it with developers. We would work with product leads to define what we actually want to get out of it. Then we would even show it in and model it in Looker, RBI tool, to then for people to use and get value from it. And we're part of every single stage, or should be part of every single stage for that. I can't think of another role that kind of, you work with different roles within each stage, but you're there hopefully throughout the whole process.
Yeah.
And you've got an understanding within each stage of what needs to happen.
Yeah. Is that your experience also, Catherine?
Yeah, I think it's a huge misconception that as data analysts we only really care about the numbers. It's actually, the role is so much bigger than that, and I think we all pull in our particular preferences, and I'm really, really passionate about the kind of the communication side and the education, and how important it is that people within the business who are using the data understand that it's not just about sort of graphs that go up and to the right for the sake of it, but it's really about understanding why, what's the interpretation of that, what does that mean, and how can we actually better shape the things that we build to really answer questions in a way that has that big kind of, that answers that huge question of so what, rather than just kind of spouting off lots and lots of numbers for the sake of it. So definitely the educational piece is a huge part of being a data analyst as well.
And who the people, it's interesting because in that cross-functional space, when you come to the educational side of it, who are the people that you're helping spread that knowledge with?
So just everyone in the group, really. So if you're working with a product lead, for example, really explaining to them the benefits of making sure that you're in the right conversations, but then also sometimes when they have questions, talking them through kind of the complexities of what's going on, but then the key takeaway of whatever it is that's the outcome as well. So again, they're the people ultimately shaping the product, so to making sure that they're really armed with useful insight rather than just this whole sort of swamp of numbers, so that they can really like make the most sensible decisions.
Yeah.
But equally, if you're working with developers as well, they're helping you bring the data through that pipeline. So trying to again work with them to get them to understand what they're doing, and again why it's important.
Yeah. And Michael, are there any like essential parts of going back to the cross-functional that go, if you do these things as a data person, or if the team does these things, success is more likely? Whether that be, like you said, Catherine, like embedding yourself right at the beginning, or like Steve said, shaping those metrics so that people really understand, or is it being able to translate those into layman's terms? Are the things that are like going, if you do these things well, the cross-functional team will be better for it? Like the ones that you don't compromise on.
I think the one that comes to my mind would be the ownership of the data, because we kind of used to live in a world where like you would request the data to be created in a way, but the team necessarily wouldn't own it. But now it's more on you as the team, the stream, whatever squad you're in, you own the data that you want to see, and you might go to another team to say, can we use your data? But then you would then own that data that you've made from it. So data ownership's a big thing at the minute.
Is that yeah, it's interesting. So is that something that we didn't previously used to do, the data ownership? Like,
not to the same extent. We used to have one team that would be the data platform team.
Yeah.
They would be the team that would build that stuff, or in a big monorepo we'd have it. But now it's like the team that is the domain expert would create the data that we use.
And then if I was going to leverage that data, so say in particular domain one, I'm really interested in it because my domain's using it. Is it still yourself that's owning domain one and I'm leveraging when I start to join up together? How does that start to work when you've got lots of different data sets that when you actually need to pull it together to give an answer to a different question? How does that sort of interaction between domains and ownership of data work?
So at this point, you'd have to go and request that team, and there's that communication of, it's like a contract. Can I use your data?
Yeah.
For this reason? They would then say, oh yeah, this is the data you want to use, rather than it kind of used to be you discover it and there'd be a million tables in one place and you wouldn't quite know what to do, but you'd have access to it. But now you have to say, oh, I'd like to use your data and put it into my data product in order to get an answer.
Right. And does that help? I'm just going to ask the question out there. Does that help with the consistency? Because what I was thinking in me, going back to some of my previous challenges, is where I'd be presenting data A, and then somebody would be challenging me with a slightly different data set B. Then why I'm getting all like weird with A's and B's, but like then they'd be like, but B's saying something different, and then we get into that whole like, well, what's actually right? Does that sort of start to mitigate that problem?
Yeah, that's why it's so important to come and speak to the data analysts and scientists that are working with the data more regularly, because I think, again, another misconception is that if you've got access to all of the data, you've got the answer.
Yeah.
And obviously, like we all know from examples where we've read statistics that look a little bit dubious, that actually, depending on how that data is interpreted and cut, it can give you completely different outcomes. So to really talk to the owners of that data and understand, that it might just be one filter that somebody's missed because they just don't know that they should have used it. Whereas again, if you go and speak to the people that created it in the first place, they're much more likely to know, actually, you need to make sure that you filter on this particular thing, because otherwise you'll get strange results.
Right, okay. So becoming that really deep domain expert in that particular area. So in terms of your different domains then, have you got domain expertise that you're a particular expert in?
I think so. I think hopefully it comes from obviously having spent lots of time in the business. So I think I've got lots of peripheral knowledge of things and sort of the history of how things were at certain different stages, which can be quite useful. And then obviously having moved into working in the support and messaging space as well, we're currently working on a new data product that will kind of shape the understanding of our ticketing system, our new one that we're using, Zendesk. So where we are at the moment is that exploratory phase of trying to understand, well, what is it that people actually want from this, so that we can shape our data product with the most sensible logic that actually gives people what they need at the end, rather than just sort of bringing everything through and saying, well, here you go, have some data. But we really want to make sure it's curated so that people understand what they're looking at, and it actually it answers some questions rather than just causing more questions, like maybe what you've just described.
Yeah, it does feel like it previously, maybe years and years ago, was a lot more waterfall, where it feels like now as a team, or the way you're working is much more in line with the way we're developing software. So Steve, are you in the team right from the beginning typically? Where as a digital analyst, how do you work in those cross-functional teams?
So I think it's important to get an analyst involved early regardless, but I think the digital analyst is probably even earlier if that's possible. The tagging and the structure that you adopt to your tracking would probably more weighted towards a digital analyst. So yeah, an example is in our core experience stream, which is tasked with developing our product page or ad views that consumers see vehicles on. We've obviously got cross-functional team, we've got design, we've got user research, product, myself, delivery, development. So you're involved really early on. And something we've actually, the last 12 months, what we tried to do, and it's working really well actually, is typically it was waterfall, or more waterfall. What we're trying to do is create a feedback loop. So data is not just used as a validation of ideas and concepts. It used to be maybe put something to test, pass it over the fence a little bit to data. What happened? That's not where we want to be. We want to be involved at the start, work, create an hypothesis, and actually eventually create that feedback loop. So we can add to the ideation process, but we can also bring that back and we go again and we keep iterating the product. And we're starting to see kind of real benefits for that in the streams that I work in the consumer world. So that's our take on it.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I didn't realize, so you said that, I didn't realise how early you were involved in that process. So you're right from inception.
So
at
it's,
the beginning.
yeah, once, even to some extent, when designer thinking about designs is what have we learned from previous implementations?
Right.
What's the data telling us? That can feed into to design, and then the whole way through it should be like an iterative learning.
Yeah.
To the point that the product's at maturity, and then I think once it gets to maturity, the questions that you want to ask slightly different. They might be about the retailer side of things as opposed to consumer, and then that's when we start to be able to do more data science at scale.
Yeah.
But yeah, really early on, it's about creating that the feedback loop and the ways of working within those cross-functional teams.
And how again, thinking from my perspective is when I'm thinking data, I'm thinking Looker and I'm thinking dashboards that our sales colleagues are using. How does that side of data fit into your worlds?
Ooh, you look like you're ready to go,
Oh
Steve.
no!
Are you just waiting? So before where I'm working at the moment, I spent a lot of time working quite closely with our retailer insight team, and as Looker sort of evolved, and I think what's really interesting is that obviously the data has to go on a journey before it even gets to Looker, and I think it's about really, again, explaining to people kind of what things sit at different levels. Basically, some things you can do once it's in Looker, and that's the creating the dashboard, that's the final flourish, as it were.
Yeah.
But like the sort of the plumbing that happens, and I think explaining the different areas, like however that data is ingested, it goes into BigQuery. We then use DBT to sort of do that transformation element that spits back out more data back into BigQuery, and then obviously that's the link where Looker joins onto it. And I think sometimes people just don't understand that, and they think when they come to the data team, when they sort of go, a bit like a builder that's sort of, looking at your roof going, oh, I think you need a new one, and we're sort of, but I think once you kind of explain what the process is, people understand why these things take time and why it's important to understand what the data is going to be used for at the end, before you even start, because obviously how you shape it will make a big difference to how easy it is to interpret and sort of build things in Looker.
Yeah. And does that, because we've talked a lot in the past about like data democratisation. God, I can't even say that word. So is it the fact that once it is in Looker, people understand how the tables work, etc., it is that people can start then creating their own dashboards, and it's that the important bit is that build up where it is much more controlled until we release it into Looker.
Yeah, so I think when we first started using Looker, I think in lots of companies, actually, people aren't really that interested in data. And initially, I think we thought, well, actually, we can put things into Looker and it's okay because only a few people will actually be using it. But actually, the democratisation was actually a huge success and people were really, really keen. So without us really realising, actually, lots of people had not access to a lot more data than we sort of anticipated.
Yeah.
And again, this just led to people obviously being enthusiastic and creating things, but adding their own logic in.
Yeah.
as it kind of went, and then you've got the problem of various different versions of the truth. So since then, that's where a lot of this process of working really closely with teams has come from. It's that kind of need to make sure that people understand, because there are nuances within data, there always are, and once we sort of explain, we're not taking access away because we don't want you to see it, we just want you to be able to see something that's correct and curate it. So that's kind of the journey that we've also been going on in Looker, is actually the appetite here is amazing. People are so interested, they really want to see what's going on with the data, which is great, but it just means it's really important that we only put stuff in there that makes sense in the first place.
Yeah. And in terms of curating dashboards and things like that, is that something that yourselves get involved with, or is it that something that there are other people like develop the dashboards? How does that fit into the whole over like the cycle of events?
Well, we do. I think the analyst group probably the most heavily involved in training people in that space. So we run an Explorer course that hopefully helps people to make dashboards in a valuable way.
Yeah.
And I think we're involved. Depends who you talk to, but you can be more involved in some dashboards than others. But there are people who aren't analysts, make their own dashboards. But hopefully we've helped them on that journey to make that dashboard. Either they've gone on a training course a year ago, or they've asked someone in a channel on Slack, can I have help with this?
Yeah.
That's hopefully the best way. There's a lot of content out there. But yeah, I think I've been involved in dashboards throughout, but there's also dashboards that other teams make themselves, and that they're really valuable.
Yeah. But how do we, again with that control bit, and I don't know whether this is a question for you, Steve, I don't know, is when we do let people loose, how do you then, if then people are interpreting things incorrectly, or, are making decisions where they don't quite understand the data, how do we, without like being really negsy, how do we keep control of that piece? Because I've seen where I've made decisions and it's based on I really have misinterpreted the data, and it's been a bit of a car crash.
I think we're getting really good at getting analysts embedded early, but we can't cover every product in the business.
Yeah,
there's not enough of us. But I think we've created good lines of communication to our leads, to our senior analysts in the business, so that these problems probably get raised and we're aware of them, so we can triage them. And it might be consultancy basis, because the user analytics team that I sit in, we will not be necessarily embedded in everything, but we will consult very heavily with teams. So we'll advisory basis, but will not be embedded. So I think there's that to it as well. It's not about being embedded within the team. It's not necessarily about looking at the dashboards. It's about process and governance as well. And I think we've got a good view of what's going on.
Yeah.
Even if we can't give it our 100% attention, we can advise on a route through.
Right. So it goes back to your point, Kath, about education, communication, collaboration.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously it doesn't always work, and we do sometimes stumble upon things where we have questions. But again, it's around kind of approaching that in the most helpful way, because clearly whoever created it, they were trying to answer something. And I think, again, as a data analyst, you want to know why, you want to know what's going on, you want to know the so what. So to try and understand where this is coming from, and then actually saying, well, that's amazing, that's great, but actually, we've got this simpler way, or we've got this data science way of actually doing things, and kind of then again educating people that is something that they will be able to use, and explaining what the sort of why we might not approach it in the way that they might have done to start with, but in a friendly way.
And the other side, we were talking with I think it's an early episode with Delapo and Pete about data products. We're talking APIs, but data products specifically. Is that something where we are creating products that are basically data? How does the data community work in those, where the actual output that we are selling to partners or retailers or whoever it may be is actually data that we're providing? How does that fit into the portfolio of work?
I would say we're the ones that we're involved in making those metrics. So performance rating or retail rating, it's been an analyst who've been at the start. They might even scope out in a their own kind of analysis, and then go from there, and then they productionize it. I've been heavily involved in the package uplift model, which powers a tool in Portal that shows if you change package, your performance rating will change by this amount.
Yeah.
And we have to think carefully about what that actually means as a metric. So performance rating, a lot of work went into what that actually means and shows, and the interpretation of it in itself could change, but we have a clear understanding of how we've gotten to that number, and we can explain it.
Yeah. And where do the data scientists come into the mix in these type of forays into whether it's performance metrics or looking at packages, etc.? Is that where they start to come into their role? I mean, how does the scientist fit? Because we talked very much around digital analysts, data analysts. What about the scientists? Where do they come into this mix?
Yes, I think they are the ones building machine learning models to either make these metrics themselves or to analyze them, and kind of spit out numbers that we can then use as, I guess the idea is there's going to be a really complicated model, let's say they've made, but the output should be fairly straightforward. And if it isn't, then we're not kind of using it in a way, but we use machine learning models on our site in search. We use it for package uplift to show you what your packages is going to do. Retail rating, I think that's still the same. Days to sell, all that kind of stuff. There's kind of a machine learning model in the background that is going to be really complicated, but the idea is that we kind of translate that. The data scientist might build it, and then the data analyst might be involved in translating what that means into something that's interpretable.
Right. That makes sense. What about on the consumer side, Steve? Do we get data science to get involved in that side? So we're talking very much like retailer, what we talk to retailers about.
Yeah, so on the consumer side, so we work really closely with the marketing team. Partially, a lot of digital analysts have that background, so they know how all these traffic sources coalesce.
Yeah.
So questions we might get is like, when did we first see that consumer? Was it 3 years ago? Was it last week? What platforms have we seen them on? Have they downloaded our apps? And also, can we create propensity scores? So data scientists do work with us in that field to create, I suppose, models to understand, is this user likely to come back? Is this a good and efficient use of our marketing spend? So we're actually doing some really good work at the minute about pushing those segments via our customer data platform, and activating those in our marketing platforms. So, it'll be really exciting to see what the output there is. But there's a whole host of possibilities that we're just starting. It's been a bit of a journey to get there with data science in the consumer space, but we're definitely starting to use it.
Cool. And in terms of then, I know we talked about your journeys in. So have you got if you go back, we talked astrophysics, maths. Is it you've got to be really strong on your maths background? However, you got to say what are the key attributes as your brain power in this space? Is it very mathsy? I'm assuming it is.
What's your favourite word of it?
It's
the word of the podcast,
mathsy.
mathsy. So it absolutely helps if you've got a background in something where you've understood, you've studied statistics on some level. I think one of the other things is about we're often working with new tools, so lots of different programming languages, and I wouldn't describe myself as a developer by any stretch, but the ability to be able to sort of pick up and understand the breadth of different things that we work with, so things like SQL, or we might do a bit of Python or R, so to be able to pick those things up relatively quickly, I think is definitely a skill too. But as I say, I think for me the most important thing is that sort of being able to communicate with people and explain something that might seem very complex, and sometimes even the word maths or statistics really puts people off from the start, and actually lots of the concepts aren't super difficult once you break them down into things that people understand. So I definitely think that is a really important part of being any part of an analytics or data community, is being able to just communicate that to other people.
Yeah. And yourself, what is your background, Steve? I know you talked about marketing.
Before
marketing, what were you doing?
Many years ago that. So I actually did engineering at university.
Right.
I did it, I finished the degree, wasn't particularly enjoying it, did a year out and thought, no, not for me. Went to the States for a few years, came back, and then I'd always built websites and played around with it, so I've come from a self-taught hacky developer background many years ago, and then got an agency gig, went through the whole breadth of digital marketing disciplines, worked in an automotive firm before, which is really useful to understand the industry. But there always was a focus on the data, and I lived in breathed in Google Analytics.
Yeah.
So yeah, and then I transitioned into this role, which was like the perfect fit, brought all those things together nicely.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's no standard route into it. I think obviously having maths helps. I think thinking logically, but clear communicator as well, as Catherine said, is definitely up there as a top attributes I think you need.
And in terms of if you were going to look again from the outside, so we've done this podcast with a little bit of an intro into data. I'm sure those topics will go a lot deeper on. But if you were looking from the outside at sort of things that people could look at and tangibly touch and feel where data has powered it, is there particular either blogs or things on the website if you looked at and said that is powered by data and that's got a load of like really clever thinking behind it that you wouldn't imagine?
My go-to would be the relevance sort. So if you go on a website and search, and you think about how you would, like, what's the best advert to show someone for them to click on it, the relevance sort has got a load of, well, it's kind of a data science model in itself, powering it, and you could have a whole episode on that. But there's engineering blogs that we've got loads of detail. There's stuff on package uplift, stuff on personalization and search. That they're tangibly changing how AutoTrader works.
Yeah.
I'd highly recommend them.
Right. And in terms of like what exciting, it's a particular exciting feature about like, giving anything away that is like top secret, but is there any particular products or areas you're working in, like we're going really deep on data that are exciting that are coming up?
I'm really excited about, so I think if you go back to the conference in April, the theme was the consumer and the user. So I think historically we've talked about events that happened, this happened so many times, but we never say, well, a user did this 5 times. So we're spent the last 3 or 4 years getting our tech in order to enable us to think about that. We've got a customer data platform. We're starting to have journeys that kind of necessitate the user logging in, adding value to the journey, and we're starting to build up this picture of the consumer. So I think this is starting to get really powerful. We're able to give consumers what they want now, much more accurately. So I think over the next couple of years, it's going to be exciting about how we can personalize the experiences for consumers based on what they've done in the past, not about what we want them to do.
Yeah, no, we've got another podcast in the pipeline around personalisation, so that's super interesting. What do you about yourself, Michael? Anything area that you're really like pushing the boundaries on or are super excited about?
I guess a new one for me is leasing. So we now own Vanarama, and we need to use their data and understand it, and it's kind of this new space. So within the leasing world, we need to sort of think about how can we personalize if people who want to do leasing, what kind of data do we need, what do we actually need to look at in terms of the other parts of the website. So you could be interested in a new car, that could be an avenue to leasing, but we need to prove that relationship exists. So that's something we need to kind of dig into.
So is it the getting into that new data set that's like piquing your interest, or is it the output of the art of what could be possible?
It was a good question. I think it's the output. Like if I can tangibly affect something on AutoTrader, that feels valuable, rather than I might go away and do my own bit of analysis, but it might not actually be that valuable. I'd rather affect the site than I would my own kind of brain.
And what about yourself, Catherine? What's exciting in your world?
I've just been thinking while you've been asking everyone else. So so we're working on moving to a new support service called Zendesk. And the benefit of that is that it brings in lots of data from other places. So all of our sort of like our chat, if you've got we've got our knowledge centre. So being able to sort of piece all these bits together that people go on, post that decision to actually find their car, but what happens afterwards, and do they actually go on and buy it, and that sort of thing. So piecing that bit together, I think that will be a really interesting insight into how our consumers use AutoTrader, but then also how they actually go on, and we never normally see what happens afterwards, and do they ever actually buy the car. It's very difficult to find that out. So being able to do a lot more of it on our platform obviously means that we actually get to see a lot more of what we influence in our day to day. So that will be really interesting, and obviously again the need to support our consumers through that as well, so we'll capture a lot more of that information.
It does sound like, from tying your response and Catherine's, it's that seeing the full end-to-end, and the AutoTrader service isn't just the bit in the middle of the finding the car.
Yeah, it's not just a
purchasing the car.
marketplace anymore.
Yeah.
It's end to end, isn't it?
Yeah, no, it's insane. It is insane. So, topics for the future then. I mean, we mentioned ML, we mentioned like data democratisation. Is there big topics that you'd say actually it's something that we should do a future podcast on and go really deep on? Because this is where this is a bit of an intro into it. So would it be data science? What would you as data people be really interested in listening more on? And that's a bit of a random question.
It's a big question, isn't it? I think obviously data science is a huge thing, and we have a retailer webinar coming up soon around how AI is being used already in our business and explaining that to our customers. So again, maybe a bit more of a deep dive into how some of that actually works at a very accessible level would be good.
Cool. Anything you can think of, Michael?
I think the team I'm sitting in is search, and I feel like search itself is this big data science problem. You could talk about that for an hour.
Yeah.
Easily,
yeah.
How do I pick listings to show you so you'll find a car quicker? That's kind of the whole problem there.
Yeah.
And that's just one stage of the journey.
Yeah.
There's all these other stages that kind of need to be optimized in a way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. And yourself, Siegs, and what I'm thinking is there's obviously people that have found this useful, this particular podcast, is the topics that like-minded brains would be really interested in.
I'm really excited about the products that we're building at the minute get us closer to the point of sale. So as an analyst, it's and the whole business, everyone can appreciate. The question is, well, did this impact sales?
Yeah.
And it's a challenging question to answer. We have a partial view, but with leasing, with digital retailing, and other products we're launching, we're starting to take control of these transactions more closely, and it gives us a better view as analysts. And I think it will enable us to scale, much quicker in these sort of things.
Awesome. Well, cheers for that. It's time up because I'm getting a bit of cramp. I don't know why. I think it's just that my age is starting to kick in.
Maths. Yeah.
Too much maths has done my brain in. But thanks for that. Big thanks to Catherine, Michael and Steve. And please like and subscribe on YouTube and follow us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. So cheers for that. We'll catch you later. See you soon.